Now we're going to talk about that a little bit with Tara Palmeri, who's been covering the Epstein story from the beginning. And she just talked to some of the survivors who talked to Blanche, who's running, basically nominated for Attorney General, currently interim Attorney General. Tara, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Cenk.
Yeah, no problem. So tell us about why Blanche wound up meeting with the survivors in the first place.
Well, he didn't want to. He was forced to. This is part of confirmation politics. He has no regard for them. He has no interest in hearing from them or speaking to him. His interest was, according to reporting in Regime Change, the New York Times, a book by New York Times reporters, he suggested that they offer a pardon to Ghislaine Maxwell in exchange for clearing President Trump. But Tom Tillis, who is a Republican who's on his way out, and it's a very, very narrow vote in the Senate Judiciary Committee for him to move to the floor for a full vote for confirmation. He basically said, because he's retiring and he's not afraid of Trump as much, and maybe there are some things he wants on his way out, some earmarks. He said, I'm not going to vote for you unless you meet with the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, they have been asking for, I think was 374 days exactly to the day, more than a year. Had they been asking to meet with the DOJ. They tried to meet with his successor, Pam Bondi, she blew them off. And so in a sort of pro forma, check the box kind of way, he met with them, finally. But they left that meeting with feeling worse, feeling he was condescending, he was arrogant, he deflected blame, and in fact, basically told them, put the onus back on them to go to the FBI, which they already have, and to re-report their stories of abuse, re-traumatizing them, which they've already done. I mean, literally, one of the survivors said, so you want me to go to the FBI and show them the files that exist in their database, in the Epstein files? You want me to point them out and show them what the testimony I gave, the sworn testimony I gave to FBI agents? And he basically said, okay, yeah, the FBI handled this badly, but acted like he had no control over the FBI as the top law enforcement agent. He is the DOJ. The FBI reports to the DOJ. He currently is the top law enforcement agent in this country right now. And to say that he has no control over cases, he said that he wouldn't commit to pursuing further cases because obviously if you've read the Epstein files at all, it's riddled with accusations against other men outside of Jeffrey Epstein, right? Any document you look at, there are so many names that are not Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and women are describing graphic detail of being sexually abused by these men. He wouldn't commit to investigating. He said, well, if you have evidence, you should bring it because right now we don't have evidence. And that's just not true.
Yeah, so this is obviously was done for show, done to check off a box. And then Tom Tillis afterwards said, oh, good job, way to meet with them. And then now he's very likely gonna get confirmed. And so you talked to the survivors that met with him. And so tell me their sense of frustration, if that's what they felt, and then we'll talk about what's gonna happen after that.
They were incredibly frustrated. They felt that he was patronizing. Every time they brought something up, he would say, that's not true, or I never said that. And I've had my own experiences with Todd Blanche. I actually asked him why they haven't prosecuted Leon Black, who is so prominently featured in the Epstein files. And there's a number of women who have made claims against him, some of them civil, some of them dropped for reasons we don't know. But clearly this is a person who is all over the Epstein files. And I asked him about a conflict of interest between Jay Clayton, who is now moved on from the SDNY, but would have been in a position to investigate him. And he did the same thing. You don't know the Epstein files. You don't know this, you don't know that. And he's very aggressive. I mean, he acts like a defense attorney for President Trump. It's interesting, that Freudian slipper. And he said, I am Trump's lawyer during the confirmation hearing. But they were incredibly disappointed. He brought in a woman who had experience in sex crime cases. And he was basically like, she's here, she'll talk to you. It was a sort of passing it on to his assistant kind of thing. And he had no interest in pursuing this any further. Virginia Giuffre's family brought up Prince Andrew because obviously he has not cooperated with the FBI, with the Department of Justice. And he was just like, out of my purview, can't do anything about it. He was not interested in pursuing this case any further. And it makes sense if he does see himself as President Trump's lawyer. President Trump calls this case a hoax. So therefore, he has very little interest in it. He does not want to seek justice for these women. And I think that they were split. Some of them felt used by way of attending this meeting, and some of them felt that they had to attend this meeting. They still hoped, because they have been treated so poorly in this. They have been disregarded at every turn. Their testimony treated as hearsay and gossip, that they hoped that they could reason with him behind closed doors. Their lawyers attended. They did this at the last minute. And the only reason he did it at 4:30 in the afternoon, because he wants to get through the Senate committee. He wants to go before the floor to be confirmed. So he's like, okay, I gotta do this. Fine, I'll meet them this afternoon. And so they had to go to the DOJ and they had this meeting, and he just wouldn't commit to anything. He literally said, this is insane. Okay, this is one of the quotes according to the survivors. I spoke to a bunch of them that were in the room.
You've got to make sure you're getting your news from a range of sources that help you see the real story, not some biased version of the truth. That's why we've been relying on our partners over at Ground News. They're a small independent team who built an app and website that gathers news from across the political spectrum so you can compare coverage on any issue with data on each source's political bias, credibility, and even ownership. I found this headline through Ground News, and I think it's worth digging into. 2 January 6 police officers sued Trump to block $1.8 billion lawfare fund. Now, this is a pretty loaded headline, and when I look at it on Ground News, I can understand the story better than I can from the headline alone. Ground News shows me that over 300 sources covered this particular story, with only 12% of that coverage coming from right-leaning sources. Now, I can also see the distinct differences in how the left and the right frame this story. For example, this high factuality source on the left is calling this a $1.8 billion slush fund for the insurrectionists on January 6th, while this right-leaning mixed factuality source is calling this a lawfare victims fund. Same story, 2 completely different implications, but I wouldn't have that context without Ground News. We have a president who plays fast and loose with the facts, and too much of the media unfortunately does the same. But I think Ground News is solving that issue, and it's one we've talked about a lot on this channel. The overload, distraction, the missing context that's skewing our perspective of the news. So if you're tired of the chaos, we've got 40% off their Vantage plan. Just go to ground.news/TYT or scan the QR code. I really think it's worth checking out.
I don't investigate, I don't subpoena people.
Yeah.
What?
He's the top law enforcement officer in the country, but he doesn't know what a subpoena is. He's never heard of it.
Right.
Yeah. So you can read more about what the victims thought in Tara's Substack. That's called the Red Letter. So make sure that you check that out. But Tara, I want to talk more about the ramifications of this as well. So look, do we just have to come to terms with and make peace with that the CIA was in on it, and hence we're never A, going to find out exactly what happened, and B, never going to get justice for some of the guys who raped these women? And the reason I say the CIA was obviously involved, I don't know that they were the predominant people who ran Epstein, but that appears to be Israel based on all of the Ehud Barak emails where at every turn, Epstein is working to make deals for Israel, international deals, procuring cyber weapons, has the Israeli prime minister, Mossad, all over his house. So that to me, and I don't know what your point of view on it is, but that's crystal clear to me. So why am I blaming the CIA and saying that they're the problem? Because Israel is a different country. At some point, somebody in our government has to make this decision. And since the CIA worked with Epstein all the way back in Iran-Contra, and he helped them clear out the planes, it appears the CIA knew all along what Epstein was doing and looked the other way as he raped American girls here. So with that kind of egg on their face, they can never, ever admit it, could they?
here's what I think. We know that we've only seen 300 megabytes, okay, of data so far, of 40 terabytes, which they're sitting on. That's according to internal FBI emails in which officers, FBI agents are discussing how much data they have on Epstein because he had these little pin cameras in Kleenex boxes inside of his house. I mean, you can read emails in which his staff says, I got these cameras, they're so small, you won't even see them, okay? So they are sitting on so much footage. Now, JD Vance likes to say, oh, the 2.5 million files are all a man named Jeffrey Epstein, another man named Jeffrey Epstein. That's absurd, okay? We know from what we've seen in the files, though, that his lawyers wrote a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information request, to the NSA, that's the National Security Agency, and the CIA, asking for proof of affiliation. They wanted to prove that Jeffrey Epstein had done something for the United States in terms of what? Likely an informant, right? I believe that Jeffrey Epstein, based on my reporting, was a sort of gun for hire, you could say. And I believe that he was working for multiple governments at the same time. He certainly bragged about it. And he first started informing the government way back when he was involved in a Ponzi scheme. At the time, the biggest Ponzi scheme in the world. It was a $300 million Ponzi scheme with Stephen Hoffenberg. Jeffrey Epstein was cooperated with the prosecutors. Stephen Hoffenberg died in prison. How does that work, right? So Jeffrey Epstein is a Whitey Bulger type. He has been useful to law enforcement. And look at his relationships. They go all the way to the top, to presidents, to prime ministers, to, this is not like convenient. And he was close with Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father, Robert Maxwell, was very much assumed to be a Mossad agent, but he was also assumed to be an agent of Russia as well. It's a sort of this world of double dealing in multiple different, countries and double agents. I mean, he was also close with Prince Andrew. What kind of intel was he getting there? So although we do know that MI6 from some good reporting did warn the Queen about Prince Andrew's activities and his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and she did nothing about it.
Yeah.
I can't say for certain that he was a spy, but we know that he certainly was trying to prove that he was helpful to the US government. And we know that there are files that we can't see for national security concerns. 2.5 million files, are they all national security?
Yeah, no, look, there is no rational people left anymore that don't think that the government is covering up these crimes. Like the only people who won't say that are like national media reporters who are, in my opinion, the biggest liars in the world. So they'll always cover things up. And we cannot tell if he worked with the CIA. Bro, he was part of Iran-Contra. How many civilians accidentally walked into the middle of Iran-Contra? They're claiming, the government's claiming they have no videos. Why did they put the video cameras in the Kleenex boxes? I mean, this is a joke. This is an absolute joke. And our media's
actually, they did tell me they had videos before they released the files. My sources told me they had a lot of video that they were sitting on.
So tell me more about that, right? So who were your sources? I don't mean their specific names, but like what category?
Inside of the FBI, yeah.
So they have tons of video. Did they tell you what kind of?
They weren't afraid to talk about it before Bondi said case closed. I mean, I've been working on this case since 2019 when he was first arrested. I did a big podcast on it. I interviewed one of the lawyers for Jane Doe 1 and who's worked with most of the survivors. And he told me that when he spoke to Jeffrey Epstein's security guard, his security guard, this big guy, his name is Uygur Zinoviev, okay? He was a Russian UFC fighter, but he warned him to back off Epstein. This is according to Brad Edwards, one of the lawyers, because Epstein was CIA and while Epstein was in jail serving time as a sex offender, that he went to Langley, which is obviously the CIA headquarters, to get binders of information to bring to Epstein while he was in jail, where he was also assaulting women, by the way, assaulting women with policemen outside of the door of his of his office because he got to do a sort of, what was it? I guess home, like he had an ankle bracelet for half the time. It was a joke.
Yeah, no, it wasn't even half the time. He only had to go there to sleep at night. He could go and work in Palm Beach during the day. It was like he was treating it like a hotel because he ran the place, just like Ghislaine Maxwell now runs the place in the minimum security place that she worked in. And Robert Maxwell was definitely an Israeli spy, and the Israelis celebrate him as such, and they gave him a state funeral. They just happened to also sell our nuclear technology to the Soviets because the Israelis betray us at every turn. So Robert Maxwell is another Mossad agent who betrayed us. Ghislaine Maxwell is very likely a Mossad agent that betrayed us. And she's being treated like royalty. So none of this. In fact, the part I didn't know though is that somebody was bringing him like files from Langley to look at while he's in prison. I mean, this is over the top.
I reported on this actually. It's in the red letter. It's on my YouTube page as well. But yeah, I have interviews about this, and I reached out to Langley and I asked them, "Can you show me a full record from this year? I want to see the visitor log because you can sure bet they have a visitor log. Okay, you can bet that." And they never got back to me. I mean, they would say, "Okay, we hear your request," back and forth for months. Would refuse to comment or get back to me.
Yeah,
that's a very easy that is a very easy request from their office.
No, our government is in on it. There's no question. This is not like, oh, I accidentally lost hundreds of hours of video of underage rape.
Yeah.
No, that's not an accident that happens. Oh, that's a guy I have done business deals with, including Iran-Contra. Oh, I did not notice him riding a pedophile ring very spectacularly and publicly, even after he was arrested in 2008. Come on. So we all know the government's 100% lying. They were lying under Democrats, they're lying under Republicans, but yes, they are lying more under Trump, who claimed he was gonna release the files. Turns out he's all over the files. Which brings me to JD Vance. So Vance goes on Rogan and comments on the Epstein case, and they say, and Ben Shapiro, we covered it a little bit earlier on the Young Turks, livid. How dare you even mention Epstein? So what was your take on what Vance said on Rogan?
It really bothers me that he keeps saying that. I'm trying to see if I have the file here, but he keeps saying that President Trump kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of his club, but that's not true. And how do I know that? Because there's a file that one of the members of Congress went to the DOJ, and it's an email with the subject line Trump, okay? So she went to the DOJ and she asked for permission to see the redaction to this email. And in the email, it's Epstein's lawyer and Trump's lawyer coordinating. Basically, not an on the record testimony, but an interview with a victim's lawyer. And in that interview, they say, Trump said he never kicked Epstein out of the club. Epstein, all of the things that he never had a problem with him. I want to get the exact, I'm trying to see if I have the exact email right now. Actually don't have it. But basically this whole idea that he reported Epstein is also not true. The investigation was long underway, and Trump had then seen Epstein as some sort of enemy because of this real estate deal. I mean, they were bidding over a piece of real estate property, ironically called the House of Friends waterfront property in Palm Beach. And because Epstein was bidding on it, it drove up the price, and Trump was pissed about that, right? And so he started to hate Epstein, and so he thought he could help the police, but they were friends. It was ridiculous. This whole idea that JD Vance tries to make, Trump look like he's the white knight in this situation. It's absurd, and it's offensive, frankly.
Yeah. So now I'm going to ask you to guess, and so I don't want the audience to take this as fact, right? Everything we've been saying is fact, and the involvement of Israel and the CIA and those particular instances that I mentioned are all facts. But now, when you turn to Trump, I don't know, and I don't think or anyone really knows if he did anything and what he did. Now, he is acting incredibly guilty, right? So that's one clue, and there are many, many other clues. But at the end of the day, do you think he actually did something illegal there with one of the girls?
Well, there are a lot of accusations against him. There are. He denies all of them, but there are accusations. And this was before the Epstein files blew up. Remember, there was a woman named Katie Johnson in 2016 who accused President Trump of raping her when she was 13 years old in 1994 in Epstein's townhouse. That was before people really, mainstream understood who Jeffrey Epstein was. This was in 2016. She's known as Katie Johnson. Her case, she decides to drop the case, citing intimidation. According to an interview I had with Michael Cohen, there was another instance. He won't say it's the same one. So he says there's another instance in which they had another Jane Doe they had to deal with in connection to Jeffrey Epstein. If you look at the files, there are a number of instances where there are complaints. I have never personally interviewed a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein who gave me an account of being assaulted by President Trump. But if you look at the files, there are accusations in there for sure.
Yeah, well,
and these accusations, when people have to give a 302 to the FBI, it should be under oath, right? I mean, I'm not sure that they're all 302s, which are sworn depositions, but it's like there are a number of other women. I think there's over 20 who have accused him of sexual abuse already. So it would kind of fit a pattern, some might say.
Yeah, damn it, he probably did it. But it doesn't really matter in terms of today, and I don't mean that it doesn't matter as a matter of justice. It matters deeply, right? But today he's not going to release the files, whether it's because he did something personally, or people have dirt on him, or the CIA says he's not allowed to. I don't know why, but we know that he's definitely holding on to the files when they clearly have all of this evidence, including the videotapes. So. That part, there's no question about. But I gotta say, on that the 13-year-old, Tara, when I first saw her story way back in the day, I remember when she was going to sue for a second, and I remember dismissing.
She did. She withdrew.
Yeah, and
so
then she withdrew.
Dropped her lawsuit. Yeah.
I have to confess that I didn't believe it. I was like, a 13-year-old, and you filed a lawsuit, and then you withdraw it. And these sound so outlandish. I mean, really, could anyone do this, let alone Trump? But then when the files came out, it looked like there was a lot more evidence than I realized in that case. And it was haunting. So when the files came out, how much more did we learn about Katie?
I think, you saw that there was a Tiffany Doe that she said could speak to what happened. It's a really tragic story. I called her lawyer, Cheney Mason, recently, and I interviewed him, and I asked him about the case, and he said that they spent a really long time investigating her story. They sent out private investigators to retract the steps. They spent days investigating her. He believed that she had a very credible case, and he wished that she went forward. But something happened in a very short period of time, and she decided to go away, and he has never heard from her since. And he said he wished that she would have gone forward with the case, and he believes her, every word of it. Now I know he's her defense attorney, but he's not being paid by her anymore. And he truly believed this, and he had done a lot of work on it.
So we don't know where she is now?
No.
A lot of this is haunting. All right, one last thing, Tara. Is there any chance that there are other Jeffrey Epsteins now? Because look, the guy, for those who don't know, it wasn't just about the massages and the sexual assaults and rapes of the girls. He also dealt in basically smuggling weapons, not just Iran-Contra, but through this port at UAE, potentially blood diamonds. So here's a guy that all the nefarious people and intelligence agencies in the world kind of need, apparently. I don't know why they need him. I don't know why they don't just get an agent to do it. But anyways, they use guys like this to do the smuggling, to do the dirty work. So are there more out there that we don't know about?
It just seems, I'm sure there are men that are, or women that are, assaulting people. And the thing is that it was the size of this sex trafficking operation. It was so vast and so broad. and it crossed, so many continents with various locations, an island, a ranch, the Upper East Side, Palm Beach, and it mixed some of the most powerful people in the world, and it included as many as 1,000 victims over 3 to 4 decades that we know of. Who knows about before the 90s, to be honest. And the fact that every time that survivors have gone to the police, to the FBI to report their case, they've been rebuffed. I mean, that's terrifying. That's an incredible miscarriage of justice. And I can't think of it if it's happening right now in broad daylight with the elites in society, with our world leaders in tech, academia, politics, banking. I mean, literally, he touched the Illuminati, if you want to call him that. He touched everyone. It's like, really, you too? And they were all friends with Epstein, and they all look the other way.
Yeah. So look, I think the reason they're not releasing it, other than the fact that it implicates us, which is huge, and that alone could do it. But if people find out either our government or the government that organized it, whether it's Malaysia or Panama or Israel, well, Tara, wouldn't American people get absolutely furious with any country that organized this to rape our children? And wouldn't that be an incredible reason to keep it hidden for all this time?
Yeah, it's horrible. And there were a lot of foreign girls that were involved in this. I know from Virginia that he sent her to Thailand to find girls. A lot of Russian women, as you can see from the files. They were talking a lot about Schengen or EU or Russian visas. Visas were the game, right? That's how they kept these girls. He created this modeling agency, MC Squared, to mean Einstein, to reflect the Einstein visa. That's the one that Melania Trump had, by the way. And this was international. There are girls in France, there are girls in Russia, there are girls in Asia, and you'll never hear from them, sadly.
Yeah. There's evil in the world. All right, and Tara Palmeri covers it and unearths it, and it's not an easy job, and we appreciate it. So check out the Red Letter on Substack. Check out Tara's channel on YouTube. Tara, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.